Coming up tonight on YCN News, Thetford, Vermont officials continue to search for the suspect or suspects who set 3 police cruisers on fire last week. A White River Junction, Vermont company is among 2 companies awarded more than $3 million in grants by the U.S. Department of Energy. And New Hampshire Republican Senator Kelly Ayotte meets with leaders of the ski industry at Pat's Peak in Henniker to answer questions related to seasonal employment. For more news, weather, and sports, it's time for YCN, your local view.
Now, your daily digest of the Dartmouth Lake Sunapee region, southern Vermont, and Windsor County. News, sports, weather, and all that is happening in our area. The news on YCN, your local view.
Good evening, and welcome to this Wednesday edition of YCN News. I'm Rose Spillman. Thetford, Vermont officials continue to search for the suspect or suspects who deliberately set 3 police cruisers on fire last week. The fire has been determined to be a case of arson. Damage to the specially outfitted vehicles is about $100,000. It remains unknown if insurance will cover the cost of the damage, and if so, for how much. An award for information that leads to identification and an arrest of people responsible for the damage is increasing. Now, a local business owner, who remains anonymous, is donating $2,000 to the $7,000 sum already pledged. Thetford, Vermont is a small town outside of Hanover, New Hampshire. About 2,600 people live there, according to the 2010 census. Anyone with information about the fire is asked to call the arson tip line at 1-800-32-ARSON or call Detective Sergeant Stephen Otis of the Vermont State Police. Otis can be reached by phone at the Rockingham Barracks at 802-875-2112. This afternoon, Valley Regional Hospital in Claremont was the site of an emergency response drill. Hospital and a Golden Cross ambulance staff, the Claremont Fire Department, and the Claremont Police Department came together at the location at 243 Elm Street for the active shooter drill, which simulated a gunman entering the medical center and shooting patients and staff. At 1 p.m., the actor portraying the shooter entered the hospital's adjacent building for Associates in Medicine, carrying foghorns to represent the gun and sound of gunshots. 2 Claremont police officers soon followed, carrying fake blue rifles with the mission of detaining the assailant. Within 20 minutes, the police had reportedly shot and killed the gunman, which then allowed the ambulance team to transport the actors who played the victims doused in fake blood. 2 of the victims were reported as fatalities. Once all victims were transported to the emergency center, police, fire, and ambulance crew gathered to discuss how the drill played out. Each person expressed what they felt worked well and what could be improved upon in the system of emergency response. The drill was one of the largest emergency preparedness efforts the hospital would take this year, Valley Regional's president Peter J. Wright noted in a press release. The objective of the sequence was to learn from any mistakes and successes so that all emergency teams could be better ready to face the possible real-life scenario. A White River Junction, Vermont company is among 2 companies awarded more than $3 million in grants by the U.S. Department of Energy. Vermont's 3-member congressional delegation of Senators Patrick Leahy and Bernie Sanders and Representative Peter Welch announced the award today. The award aims to make solar energy more affordable and available for consumers. Norwich Technologies will receive $2.1 million. Faraday and Middlebury is the second company. Its grant is for $1 million. Businesses and residential customers are keeping the interest in alternative energy use growing strong. While the initial conversation to solar energy may be higher than other energy sources, savings on energy bills over the long run usually pay off, studies show. Renewable energy sources do not add to climate change problems, too. When YCN News returns, New Hampshire Republican Senator Kelly Ayotte meets with leaders of the ski industry at Pat's Peak in Henniker to answer questions related to seasonal employment.
The YCN News continues in a moment.
Welcome back to YCN News. I'm Rose Spillman. New Hampshire Republican Senator Kelly Ayotte met yesterday with leaders of the ski industry at Pat's Peak in Henniker to clear up questions related to seasonal employment. When is a seasonal employee at the state's ski resorts considered a factor in the resort's health care mandate plan? That's the question Ayotte met to resolve. Seasonal employees typically are categorized differently under accounting and human resource practices. The nation's new health insurance law requires companies of a certain size to offer medical insurance to full-time employees. Defining what makes a seasonal employee eligible for benefits or not is where ski resort owners had questions. If resorts had to pay for health insurance, would resorts need to shorten the skiing season to afford the extra costs? The new healthcare law defines seasonal employees in two different ways, a member of Ayotte's office staff explains. Ayotte is taking the lead on U.S. Senate legislation that would establish one standard definition and simplify the rules for employer compliance with the new law. Executive Director of Ski New Hampshire, Jessica Keeler, says on behalf of resort owners, Senator Ayotte's concern on the issue is graciously appreciated. Ayotte is co-sponsoring the 40 Hours is Full-Time Act, bipartisan legislation introduced by Republican Senator Susan Collins of Maine and Democrat Senator Joe Donnelly of Indiana. That would restore the traditional 40-hour work week. The health care law effectively defines full-time employment as 30 hours per week. The federal government has not yet enacted this part of the law. It's not great news for senior citizens, disabled veterans, and others living on Social Security, says U.S. Senator Bernie Sanders of Vermont. He's talking about the 1.7% increase in the cost of living adjustment announced this week. That's a small increase, also known as COLA. This is the third year in a row that the COLA has been less than 2%, Sanders says. In 2010 and 2011, there was no increase at all. Prescription drug prices are increasing along with home heating costs as winter approaches. 58 million Americans rely on Social Security. That number includes nearly 4 million disabled American veterans. Instead of cutting Social Security, it needs to expand, says Sanders. The cost of living adjustment should be based on the spending patterns of seniors, he says. Meanwhile, in a related story, the Social Security Administration will return to its practice of mailing paper statements to U.S. workers informing them of expected income from Social Security. Several years ago, people had to register online to receive this information. The process included setting up a complicated password. When YCN News returns, we'll hear from Kearsarge Chronicles' Lynn Solomon, who met with Charlie Freiberg, director of Skits Vintage Hitchcock.
The YCN News continues in a moment.
Welcome back to YCN News. I'm Rose Spillman. Now Matt McDonald will have a look at our weather for the next few days and then move on to sports.
Thanks, Rose. Tonight we'll have rain with lows in the mid-40s. Tomorrow the rain will continue with winds around 5 miles per hour and a high of 51 degrees. Tomorrow night we'll have a 70% chance of precipitation until around 5 a.m. Skies will be cloudy with lows around 44 degrees. Friday will have a 40% chance of rain with winds up to 10 miles per hour. Skies will be cloudy and highs will be in the 50s. Friday night we'll have a 30% chance of showers with mostly cloudy skies and a low of 42 degrees. And now let's take a look at our fall foliage report. We will continue to bring you foliage updates in New Hampshire and Vermont counties. Now let's see what's coming up on our community calendar. Tomorrow night in Walpole, New Hampshire, the Select Board will meet at 6 p.m. In Vermont, the Heartland Public Library will host the Socrates Cafe from 6:30 to 7:30 p.m. In Quechee, the Mid-Vermont Christian School will hold a Christian music concert from 7 to 9 p.m. At 8:30 p.m. in Brattleboro, the Whetstone Station Restaurant and Brewery will host Jake McKelvey and the Countertops. Remember, you can submit local events from your community by sending them to news@ycnnow.com. And now let's look at our daily high school sports roundup. There was a boys soccer game last night with Fall Mountain facing Stevens. The final score of the game was 1-0, with Fall Mountain as the winner. In girls soccer, there was another close game, this time between rivals Hanover and Lebanon. Hanover edged past Lebanon 1-0. Hanover's record improves to 13 wins, 1 loss, and 1 tie game. Hanover will finish off their regular season in a Friday game with Conval.
Thanks, Matt. When YCN News continues, we'll join Capital Connections' John O'Connor.
The YCN News continues in a moment.